My name is Elias Whitmore, and on the morning of my grandfather's funeral, I felt like an uninvited guest at a play where the script had already been written without me. The rain was thin and persistent, tapping on the roof of my old Honda like impatient fingers reminding me I didn't belong here. I stepped out, tightened my thrift store coat, and stared at the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, a place that had never welcomed me, even when I was a child. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, expensive perfume, and old money. People spoke in soft, confident voices, the kind you only hear from those who have never worried about the price of anything. The chandeliers glittered above them, like frozen constellations, illuminating the same familiar faces, elegant, sharp, and trained to smile only when it served a purpose. The moment I walked in, every whisper seemed to tilt in my direction. Eyes skimmed over me, assessing, calculating, dismissing. My cousin Preston adjusted his perfectly folded pocket square and gave me that look, the one he reserved for waiters who served him too slowly. His sister Mallory was recording a video near the staircase, probably for her followers. A bittersweet family gathering, or some equally hollow caption. To them, I was Elias the history teacher, spoken with the same tone someone might use to describe a stray dog that occasionally wandered onto their lawn. Not a disappointment, that would require expectations. Just irrelevant. And in this family, irrelevance was the deepest insult. I tried to ignore the way they glanced at my worn shoes and my inexpensive haircut, but it settled on my skin like dust. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I wasn't here to compete for their approval or their wealth. I came because my grandfather, Roland Whitmore, once sat with me on quiet Sunday afternoons, teaching me chess and asking questions no one else bothered to ask. But the man lying in the closed casket now was not the same grandfather I remembered. Rumors, power struggles, and decades of calculated silence had turned him into a legend, one the family worshipped not out of love, but out of fear of losing everything he built. When the ceremony shifted toward the reading of the inheritance, the atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations died down. Bodies leaned forward. It was like watching predators circle around a carcass they believed was theirs by right. The attorney stepped into the center of the room holding a thick envelope, and the tension became almost physical. I stood near the wall, hands tucked into my sleeves, wishing I could fade into the wallpaper. I didn't expect anything. I didn't want anything. But I could feel the anticipation radiating from the rest of them, the hunger for more homes, more land, more power. Someone behind me whispered, loud enough to sting, "Why is he even here? Did he think he'd get something?" A soft laugh followed, and for a moment I felt exactly like they wanted me to feel, small, ashamed, out of place. But then something else rose inside me. Not anger, not pride. Something quieter, older, heavier. Maybe the memory of my grandfather's voice telling me, "Always look deeper, Elias. Surface stories are for lazy minds." I didn't know it yet, but this day, this humiliating, suffocating day, wasn't an ending. It was the first move in a game my grandfather had started long before any of us were born. When the attorney cleared his throat, the entire room shifted toward him like metal pulled to a magnet. I stayed where I was, pressed against the wall, trying to be invisible. But invisibility doesn't work when people want you to feel seen, and lesser. The attorney, Mr. Harland, adjusted his glasses and began the ritual. One by one, the names were called. Preston Whitmore. A beach house in Palm Springs, shares in a shipping company, and a trust fund large enough to buy a small island. Preston smiled without even attempting to hide it, already planning a celebratory post for his friends. Mallory Whitmore. A stake in a luxury fashion brand and the townhouse on Fifth Avenue she'd always claimed was basically hers anyway. She let out a breathy laugh and dabbed at imaginary tears with a designer handkerchief. The list went on. Every cousin, every sibling, every branch of the family tree received something massive. Properties, companies, collections, assets with more zeros than phone numbers. The room buzzed with restrained triumph, the kind wealthy people use to pretend they're humbled by good fortune while secretly gloating. I listened, waiting for my name with no emotion at all. It would come. there would be nothing. And that was fine. But then Harlan paused. He lifted a thinner envelope from the stack, almost dainty compared to the others. He looked at me with a flicker of sympathy, or perhaps embarrassment. Elias Whitmore. A quiet ripple spread through the room. Preston smirked. Someone in the back whispered, "Here it comes." Harlan handed me the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. No keys jangling inside. No stack of documents. Just paper. Maybe one sheet. My fingers felt strangely numb as I opened it. Inside were $19 folded neatly, and a rusted, old-fashioned key, the kind that belonged to a door built before any of us were born. I stared at the items, unsure whether this was supposed to be symbolic, meaningful, or simply cruel. That's when Mallory's laugh cut through the silence. "Oh my God, is that? Are you serious? Grandpa left him lunch money." A few others snickered, trying to muffle it but not trying very hard. Phones lifted discreetly. Someone was already recording. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Is there something else?" I asked Harlan quietly. He shook his head. "That is the full inheritance designated to you, Elias." Preston leaned in from a few feet away, grinning like a man who had just witnessed a spectacular fall. "Guess Grandpa wanted you to have bus fare home." More laughter. Heat rose in my face, but I kept my eyes on the key. Its tarnished metal, the tiny scratches, the weight of something that didn't fit this room of glass and gold. It didn't belong here, just like me. For a moment, an awful thought slipped into my mind. Maybe this is what he thought of me. Maybe this is all I deserved. The world blurred around the edges. Laughter, whispers, the rustle of expensive fabrics, all collapsing into an echo chamber of humiliation. I reminded myself to breathe, to not let my face betray anything, because inside all that noise I suddenly felt something strange. Not anger, not shame, something else. A pull, a question. Why a key? Why this key? What door could it possibly open? Before I could gather my thoughts, Harlan cleared his throat again. Louder this time, a signal the ceremony was over. People swarmed to congratulate themselves, shaking hands, exchanging hugs. Nobody came near me. I slipped the key and the $19 back into the envelope, holding it like a bruise I didn't want anyone to touch. As I walked toward the exit, a final wave of whispers followed me. Soft, smug, satisfied. But once I stepped outside where the cold air sliced through the tension still clinging to my skin, a single thought rooted itself in my mind. My grandfather was many things. But he wasn't petty. If he left me a key, there had to be a door. I just didn't know yet that opening it would unravel everything my family ever claimed to be. I had almost reached my car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another relative coming to offer one of those condescending half-apologies. "Don't take it personally, Elias. Grandpa had his reasons." Or, "Maybe he wanted to teach you a lesson." As if they'd ever understood a single thing about me. But the voice that called out wasn't familiar. "Elias Whitmore?" I turned. A man stood under the archway, half hidden by the shadow of the estate's stone columns. He was older. Gray hair, tired eyes, posture that suggested he carried secrets like they were bricks strapped to his spine. His coat was worn at the elbows, wet from the rain, and didn't match the kind of wealth parading inside the house. He approached slowly, as though making sure none of the Whitmores were watching. "Yes," I said carefully. "Can I help you?" He stopped a few feet away. For a second, he simply studied my face, searching for something, recognition, maybe, or courage. Then, in a quiet, steady voice, he said the words that shifted the ground beneath my feet. "She said you'd be the only one." 5 simple words, but they landed like a stone thrown through glass. I blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" The man looked around as if the walls themselves might be listening. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your grandmother. Before she passed, she told me that when the time came, you would be the only Whitmore brave enough to do what must be done." My heartbeat stumbled. My grandmother? My grandmother, who had died years before my grandfather? The woman whose memory the family barely spoke of? "I don't understand," I said. What does this have to do with? He nodded toward the envelope in my hand. The key. You have it, don't you? Instinctively, I tightened my grip around it. Yes. A faint, almost relieved smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He exhaled as if confirming something he'd worried about for a long time. Good, he said. Then it's starting. She was right. Before I could ask what it was, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, rain-stained card. On it was an address, handwritten in firm, old-fashioned pen strokes. No name, no explanation. He pressed the card into my palm. Go there, he said. Tonight, if you can. Don't tell anyone in that house. They must never know you were given this. The wind picked up, tugging at the edges of his coat. For a moment, the rainlight reflected off his eyes, and I could see something raw there. Fear, loyalty, urgency. Who are you? I asked. He hesitated. Someone who owed your grandmother a promise. Then he stepped back, retreating toward the narrow path beside the estate, blending into the gray drizzle like he was part of it. Before he disappeared completely, he called out one last thing. She trusted you, Elias, even when the others forgot who you were. And then he was gone. I stood alone in the driveway, the card growing damp in my hand. The envelope with the key suddenly feeling heavier than it had inside the house. The rain struck harder, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was my grandmother. The warm voice, the quiet intelligence, the way she always seemed to see through people like they were glass. The family spoke of her as if she'd been fragile, but the man's words echoed differently. Brave enough. Do what must be done. Whatever she had left for me, whatever this key opened, it wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a mission, and I was already in the middle of it. I spent the rest of the day pacing around my small apartment, the card with the handwritten address lying on the table like a riddle I wasn't ready to solve. Every time I glanced at it, I heard the man's voice again. She said you'd be the only one. By evening, resistance felt pointless. Answers weren't going to come from staring at an address. So, just after sunset, I grabbed my jacket, slipped the rusted key into my pocket, and drove through the thinning fog toward the edge of the industrial district, where streetlights flickered like they were thinking about giving up. The address led me to a building that looked abandoned from the moment it appeared in my headlights. A squat, concrete structure with boarded windows and peeling paint. No sign, no number. No indication anyone had used the place in years. But the card had pointed me here, and something in my gut told me to trust it. I stepped out of the car, the cold night bristling against my skin. The door was metal, heavy, a relic from another era, and right in the center of it, half hidden under rust and neglect, was a keyhole shaped exactly like the uneven silhouette of the key in my pocket. My breath caught. He hadn't lied. I hesitated only a second before sliding the key in. It resisted, grinding like old bones, then suddenly turned with a deep, echoing click that vibrated up my arm. The door groaned open. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old paper, and something else, something like time itself had been sitting, undisturbed for decades. I flicked on the light switch by instinct, half expecting nothing to happen. But a single fluorescent bulb crackled to life overhead, casting a pale blue glow across the room. I froze. The space was enormous, much larger than the building looked from outside. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with boxes labeled in my grandmother's precise handwriting. Several metal cabinets formed narrow aisles like a private archive. A projector sat on a table. 3 reel-to-reel tape machines. An entire wall of locked drawers. This wasn't storage. This was a vault of secrets. My grandmother had built this, but why? I stepped inside, letting the door fall shut behind me. The quiet was thick and almost sacred silence that made me feel like I'd trespassed into someone's soul. Dust motes drifted in the cold light, settling over stacks of folders and carefully sealed envelopes. I approached the nearest shelf. A box labeled 1959 Foundation Years Private sat at eye level. Beneath it, another. Shipping contracts restricted. Then, family accounts, do not open without cause. The farther I walked, the more impossible it became to breathe steadily. Everywhere I turned, there were records, handwritten journals, binders with stamped tabs. evidence logs, photographs sealed in plastic sleeves. This was a lifetime of collecting, organizing, preparing, a lifetime of watching the Whitmore family from behind a curtain no one else even knew existed. My grandmother had hidden all of this, not just from the world, from her own children. I stopped at a table in the center of the room. On it sat a small, neatly wrapped package with a note on top, written in the familiar looping script I hadn't seen since I was 13, for Elias, if he finds his way. My throat tightened. My hands trembled as I reached for the package. The paper crinkled softly under my fingers, the weight inside surprisingly light. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I sat down in the old wooden chair beside the table, letting the reality of the room settle around me. My grandmother, the woman they dismissed as gentle and fragile, had built an entire fortress of truth, a truth she trusted no one with, except me. And for the first time since the funeral, the humiliation, the whispers, I felt something shift inside my chest. This key hadn't been an insult. It had been an invitation into a world my family had spent decades pretending didn't exist, a world my grandmother had built to expose them, and I had just stepped into the center of it. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the package with my name on it, afraid to break whatever fragile connection remained between us. It had been years since I'd heard my grandmother's voice, soft, warm, impossibly calm. She had been my quiet refuge in a family of storms, and now in this cold, hidden room, it felt as though she was sitting right beside me, waiting for me to take the next step. Eventually, I reached for the twine around the package. It came loose with almost no effort, like it had been tied by someone who knew I'd open it alone, and gently. Inside was a single reel-to-reel audio tape, labeled simply, "For Elias, play first." My hands shook as I carried the tape to the nearest machine. It was old but well-maintained, clean, dusted, oiled. She must have tended to it herself. I threaded the tape through the spindles the way my grandfather had taught me years ago, then pressed the worn play button. For a second there was only static, then a breath, then her voice. "Hello, my sweet boy." My heart clenched so hard I had to grip the table. It was her, not a memory, not a distant echo. Her real voice sounding as alive as she had when she used to read to me before bed. "If you're hearing this," she continued softly, "then I am gone, and your grandfather is gone as well. I'm sorry you found out this way, but I know you, Elias. You've always sought the truth, even when it was painful." I swallowed hard, blinking as my vision blurred. "I left this room for you, and only you, because you are the only Whitmore who sees people, not prophets, the only one who can bear the weight of what lies beneath the surface." She paused as if choosing her next words with care. "Our family is not what it pretends to be." A cold chill slid down my spine. For decades, your grandfather's success came at a cost. Deals that were not as honest as they appeared, promises made in shadows, debts paid with silence. And while your grandfather built an empire, others built graves. My pulse thrummed in my ears. "I loved him," she said quietly, "but I also saw the truth he tried to lock away. I tried to guide him, but power becomes a cage, Elias, one he could not escape." The tape crackled softly before she continued. "When your mother died, far too young, far too suddenly, I realized something terrible. The secrets of the Whitmore family were not just dangerous. They were deadly." I sucked in a sharp breath. My mother's death. They had always called it a tragic accident, but the way grandmother said dangerous, it didn't sound tragic at all. "I began to collect everything," she said. "Documents, correspondence, recordings, enough to protect the innocent and expose the guilty. Your grandfather knew what I was doing, and though he disagreed, he let me continue. Perhaps that was his way of seeking redemption." I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to steady myself. "But the rest of the family must never know about this archive. They would destroy it and you to preserve the illusion they live behind." Her voice softened again, tender but trembling. "I chose you, Elias, not because you are perfect, but because you are kind, because you see value in things that are forgotten, in people who are overlooked. You were never corrupted by their expectations. A breath, a whisper. You are the only one I trust to finish what I could not. My fingers tightened against the edge of the table. I know this task is heavy, and you can walk away if you must, but if you stay, you will uncover the truth behind every lie the Whitmore name was built upon, and you will give voice to those who were silenced. Her voice faded for a moment, replaced by the soft hum of the machine. Then she spoke one last time, barely above a whisper. Whatever you choose, know this. You are always my greatest hope. The tape clicked to a stop. The room fell into silence again, but everything inside me was in motion, spinning, unraveling, rearranging itself into something new and frightening. My grandmother hadn't left me a key. She'd left me a mission, and now there was no way back. I didn't fall asleep that night. Not really. My body surrendered for brief moments, but my mind stayed perched on the edge of consciousness, like an animal waiting for footsteps in the dark. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake again, half expecting to catch a whisper, a shadow, a breath that wasn't mine. By dawn, my throat felt raw, as if even breathing had become an effort. And then finally I heard it, soft creaking, slow, deliberate, someone moving down the hallway. I kept my eyes half closed, just enough to see through my lashes. The door opened a crack. A silhouette slipped inside. Whoever it was didn't turn on the light. They just stood by my bed. Watching, I felt the air change in that strange way it does when another person is inches away from your face. My heart hammered so hard I wondered if they could hear it. The figure leaned in closer, and for a moment I caught the faint smell of their clothes detergent. Coffee, something metallic. Then they whispered, except I wasn't sure at first if it was a whisper or my imagination trying to fill the silence. The voice was too low, too controlled. I strained every nerve, focusing on each sound like it was a lifeline. Not much time left. The words were barely a breath, but I heard them. I heard all of it. The figure straightened. I resisted every instinct to flinch. If they thought I was awake, everything would unravel too soon. They stayed for a long moment listening, maybe thinking, then slipped out the way they came. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Only then did I allow myself to breathe again. My first thought wasn't fear, it was clarity. They weren't just planning something, they were executing it. And whatever not much time left meant, it wasn't metaphorical. I needed answers, real ones, but I couldn't ask questions without blowing my cover. I had to use something they couldn't suspect, something simple, something built into the hospital environment itself. And that's when I realized what I had overlooked. In my room, behind the curtain near the IV stand, there was a wall-mounted panel, one of those nurse call boxes with a small speaker, the kind that wasn't just for calling staff, but also for routine updates from the hallway intercom. Most patients wouldn't think twice about it, but someone on the outside of this room might. If they were discussing me openly in the corridors, I might be able to hear it. So I planned. I timed. I waited for the shift change when people got sloppy, tired, talkative. At exactly 8:47 a.m., the hallway filled with footsteps and overlapping conversations. I gently nudged the call panel's volume knob with my fingernail, just enough to amplify the ambient noise. Not enough to alert anyone, and that's when the voices filtered through. "She's stable?" "For now, but you heard what he said. Move forward tonight if..." I pressed my ear against the cold plastic. "The husband wants it clean. No trauma. Something that looks like a complication." My blood iced over. They weren't just planning my death. They already had a timestamp. Tonight. I stayed completely still as the voices bled through the call panel, words slipping in and out whenever someone walked past the speaker. It felt like trying to listen to a confession underwater, but the pieces I did catch were enough to paint a picture I could no longer ignore. My husband. He wasn't confused or devastated or desperate to help me recover. He was orchestrating all of it. For a moment, the shock was so sharp I almost forgot to breathe. The man I had built a life with, the man who swore he couldn't live without me, had already decided how and when I would die. A clean death, a complication, something tidy, something convenient. I forced myself to swallow the rising panic. I couldn't afford panic now. Panic made people sloppy. Panic got people killed. Tonight, they planned to do it tonight. Which meant I had one day less than a day to find out why and to figure out how to stay alive long enough to stop them. But first I needed intel. I gently lowered the volume knob back to its original position. I couldn't risk a nurse walking in and noticing it was shifted. Every detail mattered now. Every tiny action could give me away. The room felt colder somehow, like the walls had absorbed the truth I'd just learned. The machines hummed steadily, indifferent to my unraveling reality. I stared at the ceiling, trying to force my heartbeat into something steady enough to think clearly. My husband wouldn't act alone. He wasn't capable of that level of precision, no matter how charming he pretended to be. Someone was helping him. Someone with access, authority, or at least familiarity with hospital routines. A nurse, a doctor, a technician. The whisperer from the night before? I replayed the moment in my head, the silhouette, the metallic smell, the deliberate pace. The details were too faint to pin down. But it wasn't my husband. The build was wrong, the height slightly off. So he had an accomplice, maybe more than one. My fingers tingled as a sense of grim determination settled in. I wasn't going to wait helplessly in this bed. Not anymore. I needed to gather whatever advantages I could. My first opportunity came sooner than expected. Around noon, a nurse walked in, a woman I hadn't seen before. She had an easy, professional smile, but her eyes didn't linger on mine the way most nurses did. People look at you differently when they think you don't remember anything. She didn't. She barely glanced at me at all. Suspicious. She checked the IV line, scribbled something on her clipboard, and turned to leave. I pretended to shift in my sleep, nudging the blanket just enough for her to think I was stirring. Her pace didn't change. She didn't even pause, definitely suspicious. When the door clicked shut behind her, I forced myself to sit up straighter on the pillows. My muscles ached, but nothing compared to the urgency building inside me. Someone inside this hospital had decided I wouldn't live to see another sunrise. Well, they were about to find out they miscalculated. I wasn't the helpless, broken patient they thought I was. I heard every word. I knew their timeline, and now I was preparing my own. Tonight wouldn't be the end for me. No, tonight was when I would finally start fighting back. The hours crawled by with a deliberate slowness that gnawed at my nerves. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. The beep of the monitor, footsteps in the hallway, the distant rattling of a cart. I'd always imagined hospitals as places of healing, but now it felt like I was trapped inside the belly of something alive, something waiting for the perfect moment to swallow me whole. If they were planning to kill me tonight, that meant the window to gather information was painfully small. I needed to know who was involved, what the plan was, and most importantly, how to slip out of their carefully constructed trap without alerting anyone too soon. My first task sounded simple: figure out who I could trust. But as I watched the door open and close throughout the afternoon, I realized the truth. Trust wasn't an option. I couldn't risk trusting anyone. Still, I could observe. The nurse from earlier came back at 2 p.m. Same expression, same detached professionalism, but her actions contradicted it. She checked my chart for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. No real nurse checks anything in 4 seconds. She didn't adjust my medication, didn't ask about pain, didn't even pretend to care. She came to confirm something, maybe to make sure I was still unconscious. When she left, I caught the faintest glint of metal sticking out of her pocket, a syringe cap. Not unusual in a hospital, but chilling when you know someone is planning a clean complication. If she was involved, then my window could close sooner than tonight. I needed to gather resources, anything that could help me defend myself if things escalated faster than expected. My gown pockets were useless, but the bedside drawer wasn't. Inside, I found the standard items: tissues, a cheap pen, a folded meal menu sheet, and a nearly empty water bottle. Alone, they were nothing. But together, potential tools. A pen could scratch or stab in desperation. A plastic bottle could distract or buy me seconds. Even the paper could jam a door latch if folded thickly enough. Not perfect, but better than nothing. I tucked the pen inside the sleeve of my gown and placed the bottle within reach under the blanket. The next part of my plan required timing. Every day around 3:30, a different nurse, one who actually treated me like a human being, stopped by with new IV bags. She wasn't involved, I was almost sure. Her footsteps were hurried, her eyes tired, her smile genuine. People faking innocence tend to overperform. She didn't. If anyone would slip up around her, it was the guilty ones trying too hard to look normal. So I listened. The door opened right on schedule. She rolled in the IV stand, humming under her breath. As she worked, someone else approached. Heavy steps, confident. My heart climbed into my throat when I recognized the voice. My husband. I had to keep my expression slack, eyes closed, but every cell in my body tensed. "How is she?" he asked, putting on the world's most convincing performance of a grieving spouse. "She's stable," the nurse replied. "Her vitals look good today." A pause. I imagined his smile, the one everyone thought was so warm. "That's good to hear." His tone didn't match his words. The nurse didn't notice, but I did. "I'll come back tonight," he added too softly. My blood froze. Tonight, he was confirming it. The nurse wheeled out the old IV bags, and he followed her into the hallway. They continued talking, their voices fading down the corridor, just out of range. I opened my eyes fully, staring at the door. If he was coming back tonight, then I needed to be gone before he arrived. Not hidden, not defended, gone.